"Mom, we were only playing around. Why do you always overreact?" Those were the words that came out of Jessica's mouth as she waved my reading glasses in the air like some kind of trophy. I stood there, everything around me nothing but blurry shapes and colors, trying to make sense of where I was in my own kitchen. My 3 grown children stood watching me, and I could hear them chuckling like this was the funniest thing they'd seen all week. "You should see yourself right now, Mom," my son David said with a laugh. "You look like you're playing some weird guessing game." They found it amusing watching me feel around the counter with my hands, knocking over my sweet tea in the process, calling out for help because I was afraid I might step on Buddy, our old lab mix. This wasn't the first time they'd done something like this to me, but something about this moment felt different. It hit me like a cold slap that they didn't see me as their mother anymore. They didn't even see me as a person worth respecting. I made my way slowly to the dining room table, the same wooden table I'd bought secondhand 35 years ago and refinished myself. The same table where they used to sit every evening doing homework, while I helped them with math problems after working 2 jobs all day. I lowered myself into the chair and listened to them continue their conversation like I wasn't even there. They sprawled across my living room furniture, feet up on the coffee table, talking loudly about some TV show, completely ignoring the fact that they just humiliated me in my own home. This house used to be filled with love and laughter. Now it felt like I was just another piece of furniture they walked around. I thought about how I'd grown up in a tiny house outside Jackson, Mississippi, where the lights got turned off more often than they stayed on. My father died when I was barely old enough to remember his face, crushed under a tree he was cutting down for a lumber company. My mother tried her best, but the bottle became her closest companion, and I learned early that if you wanted stability in life, you had to create it yourself. Jessica finally tossed my glasses back to me like she was throwing scraps to a stray dog. "Lighten up, Mom. It was just a joke." I put them on and looked at my children clearly for the first time that day. Really looked at them. Jessica, my oldest at 42, had always been the one to push boundaries. She was smart and could charm anyone when she wanted something, but lately, that charm only came out when she needed money or favors. David, 39, used to be my gentle one, always helping with groceries or yard work without being asked. Now he walked past me struggling with shopping bags like I was invisible. And then there was Sarah, my baby at 35, who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard and say they smelled like happiness. These days, she only called when she needed something and never stayed long when she visited. I smiled and nodded, but something inside me went completely quiet. I got up from the table and walked to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out the old metal box I kept underneath it. Inside were all my important papers, my updated will, bank documents, and a letter I'd written 2 years ago but never sent. That letter was addressed to my bank, asking them to change who would get my money when I died. I'd written it after David had asked me to help him buy a car, then disappeared for months without even a thank you call. But I'd never had the heart to mail it. Until now. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 71 years old, and I spent 40 years working as a secretary at the county courthouse. I've lived in this house for over 3 decades, and I've watched this neighborhood change from young families to empty nesters to young families again. I was born in a house so small you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms out wide. When my daddy died, Mama did what she could, but grief and whiskey don't make good companions. I learned to take care of myself because there wasn't anyone else who would. I married young, maybe too young, to a man named Robert who promised me the world but delivered disappointment. By the time I turned 28, I had 3 babies and no husband. Robert decided one Tuesday morning that family life wasn't for him, and left while I was at work. I came home to find half his clothes gone and a note on the kitchen counter saying he needed to find himself. I never saw him again, and honestly I stopped looking. Raising 3 children alone wasn't easy, but I made it work. I took a job at the courthouse during the day and cleaned offices at night. I packed their lunches every morning with little notes tucked inside, helped with homework at the kitchen table, and made sure they had clean clothes for school. I paid off this house by the time I was 58, never missing a single payment. I never missed a birthday party, a school play, or a parent conference either. Jessica was always the leader of the group, quick with words and even quicker to find ways to get what she wanted. David was quieter, more thoughtful, and usually went along with whatever his older sister decided. Sarah was my sensitive one, always bringing me pictures she'd drawn or flowers she'd picked. But somewhere along the way things changed. They grew up and moved out, which was natural and right. But then they started moving back in. First, it was Jessica after she lost her job at the insurance company. She said she just needed a few weeks to get back on her feet. Those weeks turned into months. Then David showed up after his wife left him, saying he needed time to figure out his next move. Sarah didn't move back in, but she started visiting more often, and those visits always seemed to end with her asking for small favors that weren't really small at all. My house became full again, but not in the way I'd hoped. Instead of family dinners and meaningful conversations, I got demands and disrespect. They treated my home like a hotel where everything was free, and the staff was always available. They'd walk into my room without knocking, eat food I'd bought for myself, and borrow things without asking. When I'd misplace something, they'd make jokes about my memory getting fuzzy. When I'd ask for help with something around the house, they'd act like I was being unreasonable. The glasses incident wasn't even the worst thing they'd done. Last month, Jessica yelled at me in front of the neighbors because I asked her not to smoke on the front porch. 2 weeks ago, David used my debit card for just gas money and ended up spending $60 on takeout. Sarah borrowed my car and brought it back with the gas tank empty and a dent in the bumper she never mentioned. Each time when I tried to address it, they made me feel like I was being dramatic or oversensitive. I started to wonder if I'd failed as a mother. Had I spoiled them too much? Had I given them everything they wanted without teaching them to appreciate it? I remembered all those nights when David had the flu as a teenager, and I stayed up checking on him every hour, bringing him soup and medicine. I thought about when Jessica's first boyfriend broke her heart, and she cried in my arms for hours while I stroked her hair and told her everything would be okay. I remembered Sarah's graduation day, how proud I felt watching her walk across that stage, knowing I'd made it possible by working extra hours to pay for her college. I used to imagine growing old surrounded by family, with grandchildren running around the yard and holiday dinners where everyone pitched in. I pictured sitting on the front porch in a rocking chair, watching the sunset while my children and grandchildren played in the yard. Instead, I'd become like a background character in my own life, only notice when something needed to be done or paid for. But as I sat there looking at the contents of that metal box, I realized something important. They'd forgotten something crucial while they were busy treating me like I didn't matter. They'd forgotten that my name was on the deed to this house. They'd forgotten who had the bank accounts and the life insurance policies. They'd forgotten that I wasn't just some helpless old lady they could push around. I was the woman who'd built everything they took for granted, and maybe it was time I reminded them of that fact. I could hear them in the living room, probably planning their evening around my television and my food. But for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what they needed or wanted. I was thinking about what I needed, what I wanted, and what I deserved. And what I deserved wasn't to be treated like a joke in my own home. The disrespect started small, so small I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Jessica would leave her dirty dishes in the sink and roll her eyes when I mentioned it. "You're retired, Mom. It's not like you have anywhere important to be." David, who used to carry in my groceries without me asking, now walked right past me as I struggled with heavy bags, his headphones on like I was part of the scenery. Sarah's phone calls became less frequent, and when she did visit, she spent more time looking at her phone than talking to me. I told myself they were just stressed. Everyone's busy these days, right? That's what people always say. But then I started noticing bigger things. David borrowed my debit card for gas, and I found out later he'd used it to buy dinner for 3 nights straight. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged. "Come on, Mom. It's not like you're hurting for money." Jessica started making fun of me in front of her friends when they came over. She'd imitate the way I walked, the way I talked, how I folded towels. They'd all laugh like it was the cutest thing, but it made me feel like I was shrinking. I'd cook dinner and nobody would show up, or they'd eat in front of the television without even acknowledging I'd spent an hour in the kitchen. They started leaving their laundry outside my bedroom door like I was running some kind of cleaning service. When I asked Sarah if she could help me clean out the attic, she sighed like I'd asked her to move a mountain. "Why do you always need help with something? You have all day to do whatever you want." That comment stung more than she probably realized. Yes, I had time, but I didn't realize I was supposed to spend it being treated like hired help in my own home. One Sunday morning, I got up early and made a big breakfast like I used to when they were kids. Scrambled eggs, bacon, biscuits from scratch, the whole thing. I set the table and waited. And waited. At noon, I found them all in the living room eating cereal straight from the box, watching some show on their phones. "We figured you were having one of your moods," Jessica said without looking up. "Didn't want to bother you." Nobody asked if I'd eaten. Nobody even noticed the food getting cold on the stove. I started eating my meals in my room after that. Not because I was trying to make a point, but because I needed some peace. And you know what? They didn't even notice I was gone. A few weeks later, I went to the doctor by myself. My knees had been swelling, and he mentioned early arthritis. "Do you have family at home who can help you?" he asked. I almost laughed. Help me? The only help I got these days was Jessica asking for money transfers and Sarah wanting me to watch her dog while she went out of town. They saw me as a resource, not a person who might need something from them. But the real wake-up call came when I overheard a conversation in the kitchen. I was coming back from checking the mail when I heard Sarah asking Jessica, "So what's the plan when she gets too old to live here alone?" Jessica's response made my blood turn cold. "Well, we're not putting her in a nursing home. I mean, this is her house. We'll just have to deal with it, I guess." Deal with it? Like I was a broken appliance they couldn't afford to replace. I stood in the hallway listening to them discuss my future like I was already gone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From anger. Pure, clean anger that I hadn't felt in years. These were the children I'd sacrificed everything for, and they were talking about dealing with me. That's when I knew this wasn't just about respect anymore. They were planning to erase me from my own life. It was a Tuesday morning when everything came to a head. I'd been outside working in my small garden, trying to keep the roses alive. I wore my old gardening gloves and sun hat, the ones David always teased me about. When I came back inside, I noticed something strange. The back door was locked, and I couldn't get my key to work. I walked around to the front, which was wide open, and stepped inside. That's when I heard Jessica's voice from the living room. She keeps all her important stuff in that blue folder behind the recipe books. Or maybe in that metal box under her bed. Sarah mentioned seeing it once. I froze. David was sitting on my couch, going through my personal papers. My private papers that I kept in a folder in the kitchen cabinet. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They both turned around. Jessica looked startled for about 2 seconds, then crossed her arms like I was the one in the wrong. "Going through your things. Don't act surprised." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We need to talk, Mom." David stood up, still holding my folder. "We've been thinking. You're getting older. And it's time we took over some responsibilities. Financial ones, mainly." I felt like someone had poured ice water down my back. "What does that mean?" Jessica walked over, her arms still crossed, speaking in that fake calm voice people use when they're trying to manipulate you. "It means this house needs to be refinanced. We're going to put it under joint ownership. You can keep living here, obviously, but we'll handle all the paperwork. You don't need to worry about complicated legal stuff anymore." I stared at them. "You went through my private papers." David looked annoyed, like I was being unreasonable. "You've got all kinds of assets just sitting there. Savings accounts, certificates of deposit, your will, that account with over 50,000 in it. We didn't even know about half this stuff until we started looking." They weren't embarrassed. They weren't sorry. They felt entitled to do this. Jessica walked to the dining table and pulled out a stack of papers. "We already talked to a lawyer. We just need your signature on a few things. It's mostly just formalities." She smiled like she was doing me some kind of favor. My stomach dropped to my feet. These were my children. The babies I'd held when they were sick, the kids I'd worked 2 jobs to support, the young adults I'd helped through college and divorces and job losses. And now they were plotting behind my back like I was already dead. "You think I'm stupid?" I asked. It wasn't really a question. Jessica's face got tight. "No, we think you're being stubborn." David tried a gentler approach. "Look, you've always taken care of everything. We get that. But it's our turn now. You're 71, Mom. What if something happens to you?" "Then it's my business," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. I looked at the papers spread across my dining table. Transfer of deed. Power of attorney. Financial guardianship. Every single page was an insult. Every line said they didn't trust me, didn't respect me, and wanted control of everything I'd worked for. I walked to my bedroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking as I pulled the metal box out from under my bed. Everything was still there: my will, my bank statements, and that letter I'd written 2 years ago. The letter was addressed to my bank, asking them to change the beneficiaries on my accounts. I'd written it after David had asked for help with a car loan, and then ignored me for months. The new beneficiary was Rosa Martinez, my old neighbor's daughter who used to mow my lawn for free and brought me soup when I was sick. She'd never asked me for a dime. I'd never mailed that letter because I didn't have the heart. But sitting there, listening to my children plot to take over my life, my heart felt different. Stronger. Clearer. I took a deep breath and walked back out to the living room. "You want me to sign away my house? My money?" I asked, looking at both of them. Jessica glanced at David. "It's not like we're stealing it." "You didn't even ask," I said. David ran his hand through his hair. "Can you not be dramatic, Mom? We're trying to help you. But if you keep fighting us, we'll have to go through the courts. You know how these things work. You get a little forgetful sometimes. They'll say you're not capable of managing your assets. Then it's out of everyone's hands." My heart stopped. "What did you just say?" Jessica stepped in quickly. "We're not trying to hurt you. We just don't want things to get complicated later on." They were threatening me. Not with violence or shouting, but with something worse. They were threatening to have me declared incompetent. To take away not just my money, but my dignity, my independence, my right to make my own decisions. I felt a pressure in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with my soul breaking. I sat down slowly, gripping the arm of my chair. They didn't move to help me. They didn't ask if I was okay. They just stood there waiting like vultures. I looked out the window at the roses I'd been tending that morning. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely powerless in my own home. They didn't see me as their mother anymore. I was just an obstacle between them and what they thought they deserved. For the next few days, I moved through my house like a ghost. Nobody mentioned the papers again directly, but I could feel their eyes on me, hear their whispered conversations behind closed doors. They weren't asking for my signature anymore. They were just waiting like predators circling wounded prey, expecting me to eventually give in. I stopped cooking meals. I stopped watering my plants. The dishes piled up in the sink until Jessica finally washed them, muttering loud enough for me to hear about how if I was going to sit around all day, the least I could do was keep the kitchen clean. I spent most of my time in my bedroom, sitting in the old recliner by the window, looking out at my backyard where the azaleas were starting to bloom. Years ago, Sarah used to pick those flowers and bring them inside in a mason jar. "They smell like springtime, Mama," she'd say with that sweet smile. I wondered where that little girl had gone, and when exactly my children had stopped seeing me as a person worth loving. Sometimes at night, I'd lie in bed listening to them laugh in the living room. The same voices that used to call Mama. When they skinned their knees now made jokes about my senior moments. I was in the house but not part of it, like a tenant in my own life. I remembered when David had pneumonia as a teenager. I sat up with him for 3 straight nights, checking his temperature, bringing him water, holding cool washcloths to his forehead. He'd cry and beg me not to leave him alone. After Jessica's first real heartbreak at 16, she climbed into my bed and sobbed until morning while I held her and told her the pain would pass. I used to save all year just to buy them something special for Christmas, even if it meant I went without new clothes or shoes. I thought all that love had to count for something. I thought it had memory, weight, meaning. But now it felt like I was the only one who remembered any of it. Then Rosa came by. I was sitting in the kitchen with my morning coffee when I saw her walking past the window. She was heading to her job at the community health center, wearing that bright yellow cardigan she always loved. When she spotted me through the glass, her whole face lit up. She waved like no time had passed at all, like I hadn't become invisible to the rest of the world. I waved back and she changed direction, coming up my front walk. I opened the door before she could knock. "Miss Margaret," she said, her voice as warm as summer honey. "I was just thinking about you. You look good." I almost laughed. "That makes one of us." She came inside and immediately sensed something was wrong. Some people can feel tension in the air without anyone saying a word. Rosa was always one of those people. We sat in my living room and I told her everything. Not because I wanted pity, but because I needed someone to see me as a real person again. And she did. She listened without interrupting, without judging, without trying to fix things. When I finished, she leaned forward and took my hand. "You built this family from the ground up," she said quietly. "But they've forgotten the foundation they're standing on. Maybe it's time you reminded them what happens when you remove the foundation." Those words settled into my bones like a warm fire. Maybe it was time. After she left, I stood at my kitchen window for a long time, looking at the garden I'd tended for 30 years. This house had become my prison, but only because I'd allowed it. I pulled out a notepad and started writing. Not a letter, not a diary entry. A plan. I listed everything I still owned in my name. The house, obviously. 2 savings accounts. The certificates of deposit. That small piece of land outside town that David always joked was worthless swamp. They didn't even know I still had that land. Then I wrote down the names of people who had truly been kind to me in recent years. The neighbor who shoveled my driveway last winter without being asked. The church lady who brought me fresh bread every Sunday. Rosa, who visited because she wanted to, not because she needed something. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. And peace doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. It means choosing what to carry and what to let go of. I was ready to let go of the guilt, the fear, and the hope that my children would change if I just waited long enough. That afternoon I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, Mrs. Henderson, who nearly choked on her coffee when I told her what Jessica and David had been trying to do. "Margaret, they can't force you to sign anything. And threatening you with incompetency proceedings? That's elder abuse. We need to document all of this." The second call was to my bank, confirming that my instructions from that old letter had been received and my beneficiaries had been updated. The third call was to a real estate agent. I wasn't planning to leave immediately, but I wanted options. I wanted to know I could walk away if I chose to. I also sat down and wrote letters to each of my children. Real letters on paper, not emails or text messages. I didn't threaten them or beg them to change. I just told them the truth. I reminded them who I was, what I'd given up for them, what I'd endured to make their lives better. I told them that from now on my life and my choices belonged to me again. I ended each letter the same way. "I love you, but I love myself too. And it's time I started acting like it." I folded the letters and left them on their pillows. That evening, when Jessica came home and found the real estate agent's business card on the kitchen counter, her face went white. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. I didn't look up from my crossword puzzle. "Something you'll need to discuss with someone else. I'm tired." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't slam doors or make dramatic speeches. And maybe that's what scared them most, the silence, the stillness, the calm strength they'd never seen from me before. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The first thing I did was take back control of my house. I drove myself to the county clerk's office, yes, drove, though they all assumed I'd stopped doing that, and updated the deed. I'd had it in a trust for years with Jessica and David listed as successors. Now I restructured everything, removing their names completely. Instead, I named the local women's shelter and a scholarship fund through my church. Next was that worthless piece of land by the bayou. The land they always called swamp garbage turned out to be sitting right where the county was planning a new recreational park. I'd been getting notices about it for months, but I'd been too distracted by their drama to pay attention. I contacted a development company and within a week, we'd negotiated a price that made my head spin. 6 figures for land I'd paid $3,000 for 20 years ago. But I didn't keep the money. I set up the Rosa Martinez Educational Fund, enough to pay full tuition for 5 young women going into healthcare. When I signed the paperwork, I smiled for the first time in months. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. While all this was happening, I played my part at home. I cooked dinner occasionally, asked about their jobs, sat on the porch reading while David mowed the lawn and ignored me like always. When they asked if I'd thought about signing their papers, I just smiled and said, "Everything's being taken care of." It wasn't a lie. Meanwhile, I quietly closed my smaller savings accounts and moved the money where they couldn't touch it. Every dollar was redirected to people and causes that actually mattered to me. Then came the house itself. I listed it with a realtor who specialized in quiet sales. She found buyers in 4 days. A retired couple from Alabama who wanted to be closer to their grandchildren. The sale was clean and quick. I gave them a fair price with one condition. I had 60 days to move out, and the sale had to remain confidential until closing. They agreed. I was still living there, but legally the house was no longer mine to leave to anyone. My children had lost their inheritance before they even knew it was gone. I hired a young man from church to help me pack boxes on Sundays when Jessica and David were out. We stacked everything in the garage, labeled but not obvious. I donated most of the furniture and all the family heirlooms they used to ignore but would probably fight over later. I didn't need things anymore. I needed peace. My lawyer sent me the final draft of my new will. I read it once and smiled. No room for confusion, no legal loopholes. The beneficiaries were clear and simple. Rosa, the women's shelter, the scholarship fund, and a few others who had shown me kindness without expecting anything in return. My children weren't mentioned anywhere. Not out of cruelty but out of clarity. They'd already taken everything they valued from me. On a Tuesday morning, I sat down at the breakfast table with Jessica and David. I told them calmly that I had decided to move into a senior community near the coast, one with a garden and people my own age. I'd be leaving the following Monday. Jessica's coffee cup clattered against her plate. Wait, what? You're leaving? Yes, I said, sipping my tea. But what about the house? David asked, panic creeping into his voice. It's sold. Has been for 2 weeks. The silence was deafening. They stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Why didn't you tell us? Jessica asked, her voice cracking. I looked at them both. Because the last time I tried to tell you something important, you went through my private papers and tried to steal my home. David swallowed hard. We didn't mean anything by that. We were just trying to help. Yes, I said. Like hiding my glasses was helping. Like threatening me with incompetency hearings was helping. Their faces turned red. Whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell and didn't care that I stood up and walked to my room, returning with 2 envelopes. These are letters. They're not angry letters. They're just honest ones. You can read them now or later. That's up to you. I placed them on the table and walked away. That weekend I left. Not with tears or regrets, but with my dignity intact and my future in my own hands. As my car pulled away from the house I'd called home for 30 years, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Jessica standing in the driveway, holding her letter, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I turned forward and kept driving. There was sunlight breaking through the clouds ahead, and for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight but my own. 3 days after I moved into my little cottage by the coast, the phone started ringing. I let it go to voicemail at first, not because I was angry, but because I wanted to hear my own thoughts without their voices drowning them out. For the first time in years, I wanted to listen to the silence and remember who I was underneath all their demands and disappointments. The first message came from Jessica. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath it like a current. Mom, please call me back. We're confused about what happened. We didn't know you were serious about moving. The realtor came by today and said the house was already sold. What's going on? This isn't like you. Just please call me. She didn't say she was sorry. She said she was confused, like my leaving was some kind of misunderstanding instead of the natural consequence of their behavior. I didn't call her back. The second call was from David. He didn't leave a message the first 5 times, just hung up. On the 6th try, he finally spoke. You completely blindsided us, Mom. You're being vindictive after everything we've done for you. So you're just going to give everything away to strangers? To that nurse girl Rosa? This is what we get for trying to help. There it was. The truth behind all their concern. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what they thought they deserved. They didn't want me back. They wanted their inheritance back. 2 days later, David showed up at my lawyer's office demanding to see my new will. Mrs. Henderson told me later that he turned pale halfway through reading it. He tried to argue that I'd been manipulated, that someone had taken advantage of my age and confusion. She calmly reminded him that I'd passed a complete mental competency evaluation before signing anything, that I provided both written and verbal statements confirming my decisions, and that everything had been properly witnessed and notarized. Your mother knew exactly what she was doing, Mrs. Henderson told him, and I suggest you respect that decision. David left angry, but Jessica took a different approach. She showed up at my cottage on a Thursday afternoon. I was outside watering my new herb garden when I saw her car pull up. She got out slowly, looking uncertain for the first time I could remember. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, no performance. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and gestured to the 2 rocking chairs on my front porch. The ocean breeze carried the smell of salt and jasmine. I offered her iced tea, but she shook her head. "I read your letter," she said quietly. "It hurt, but I think maybe it was supposed to." I waited. I'd learned the power of silence. She stared down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you as my mom and started seeing you as just someone who was in my way." "You were overwhelmed," I said gently. "I understand that. But being overwhelmed doesn't excuse being cruel." She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I didn't think you'd actually leave. I didn't think you'd cut us out completely." "You didn't think I could," I corrected her. She looked up at me, then really looked at me. "So what happens now?" I gazed out at the water, watching a pelican dive for fish. "Now I live my life. You live yours. If you want to build something real with me, not with my money, not with my house, but with me, then maybe we can find our way back to each other." She sat there for a long time, crying quietly. Then she got up and hugged me. It was the first genuine affection I'd felt from her in years. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really, really sorry." "I know," I said. "But sorry isn't enough anymore. You'll have to show me." She nodded and left. And I didn't cry when her car disappeared down the road. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope mixed with boundaries. A week later, something unexpected happened. The local newspaper ran a small story about my scholarship fund. They called it the Margaret Thompson Second Chances Fund, and wrote about how it was created by a woman who believed in giving opportunities to those who'd been overlooked. My church community sent flowers. Rosa came by with homemade soup and told me the first scholarship recipient had been chosen, a young woman whose mother cleaned houses for a living. "She cried when she heard about the fund," Rosa said. "She said she'd never expected anyone to believe in her dreams." I cried too, but not from sadness. From relief. From purpose. From the knowledge that my money was going to change someone's life in a positive way instead of enabling more bad behavior. Some of David's friends heard about the story. Word spread quietly through their social circles. A few people who used to invite him to dinner parties suddenly became too busy. Others asked pointed questions about how he was treating his elderly mother. It's funny how quickly people's attitudes change when they realize what kind of person you really are. David lost some of his social standing, but I didn't lose anything. I'd gained my self-respect back. The cottage felt like coming home to myself. Every morning, I'd make coffee and sit on the porch watching the sunrise paint the sky different colors. I planted lavender by the windows and tomatoes in the backyard. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years, took long walks on the beach, and had actual conversations with my neighbors who treated me like a person worth knowing. I started volunteering at the community health center where Rosa worked. Twice a week, I'd help elderly patients fill out paperwork or just sit and listen to their stories. It reminded me that I wasn't the only one who'd been forgotten by family, but I was one of the lucky ones who'd found the strength to reclaim her life. 3 months after I moved, the church held a small ceremony to honor community members who'd made significant contributions to local causes. My name was on the list, not for the casseroles I'd brought to potluck dinners over the years, but for the scholarship fund that was already helping its 3rd recipient. I hadn't planned to attend. I wasn't looking for recognition or applause. But Rosa called and gently insisted. "This isn't about ego, Miss Margaret. It's about showing other women that it's never too late to take control of their own story." So I went, wearing my best blue dress and the pearl earrings I bought myself for my 70th birthday. The ceremony was lovely, filled with people I'd known for years who genuinely seemed happy to see me thriving. After the closing prayer, I was gathering my purse when I saw them. Jessica and David standing near the back of the room, looking uncertain about whether to approach me or slip away quietly. They came forward after most people had left. Jessica held a small bouquet of white roses. David looked older somehow, grayer around the edges, thinner in the face. "Mom," Jessica said, her voice shaking slightly, "could we talk somewhere private?" We walked out to the church garden, where the late afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees. I sat on a stone bench while they stood in front of me like children called to account for their behavior. We came because we wanted to say something, David began, clearing his throat. Not to argue or ask for anything. Just to say it. I nodded, inviting them to continue. You were right, he said simply. We treated you like a problem we needed to solve instead of our mother who deserved respect. And I can't believe it took losing everything to make us see that. Jessica stepped forward. We expected you to always be there, quiet and agreeable, taking whatever we dished out. We didn't realize how much we'd taken from you until you reminded us it was never ours to take. I studied their faces, looking for sincerity instead of manipulation. What I saw was genuine remorse mixed with the painful realization of what they'd lost. You didn't just take my house, I said quietly. You took my dignity. You laughed when I couldn't see. You made decisions about my future without including me. You made me feel like I didn't matter in my own life. Jessica wiped tears from her cheeks. You did matter. You always mattered. We just forgot how to show it. Silence settled over us for a moment. Then David stepped closer. We don't expect forgiveness. We don't deserve it. We just wanted you to know we're sorry, and if there's any way to earn back even a small piece of your trust, we're willing to work for it. It wasn't a plea or a manipulation. It was honest accountability, something I'd never heard from them before. I looked them both in the eye and spoke carefully. You lost my trust when you tried to control me. You lost your inheritance when you tried to steal from me. But you're still my children and I still love you. That love doesn't promise you money or a place in my will. But it offers something else. They waited, hardly breathing. It offers you a chance to build something new. Something not based on what I can give you, but on who we choose to be with each other going forward. David's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Jessica smiled through her tears. Thank you. That's more than we deserve. Then don't waste it, I said. We stood there in that garden as the sun set behind the trees. I didn't hug them. They didn't ask me to. We simply shared a moment that felt real and raw and honest for the first time in years. Later that evening, back at my cottage, I sat on the porch with chamomile tea and watched the stars come out over the water. Rosa had texted me a picture of the newest scholarship recipient, a young woman studying to become a nurse practitioner. She'd written a thank you note. Miss Margaret, I promise I'll make you proud. I thought about justice and how it comes in different forms. Sometimes it's loud and dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and persistent, like waves reshaping a shoreline one grain of sand at a time. Sometimes it looks like a letter rewritten, a door closed firmly, or a garden conversation where the right words are finally spoken. And sometimes justice looks like peace. Not the kind someone hands you, but the kind you carve out for yourself with careful decisions and firm boundaries. The days that followed felt like the gentle opening of a new chapter. My cottage became a real home, filled with the sounds of my choosing classical music in the morning, ocean waves at night, the laughter of new friends who valued my company for its own sake. Jessica started calling once a week, not to ask for anything but to check in. Our conversations were careful at first, like two people learning to trust each other again. David kept his distance, still nursing his wounded pride, but the anger had faded into something that looked more like regret. The scholarship fund grew beyond anything I'd imagined. Other donors heard the story and contributed. By the end of the year, we were able to help 12 young women pursue their education dreams. Each thank you letter I received reminded me that good can come from even the most painful situations. I found myself again in that little cottage by the sea. The woman who'd been buried under years of disrespect and taken for granted kindness had emerged stronger, clearer, more certain of her own worth. When I looked in the mirror now, I saw someone who'd learned the difference between loving people and enabling them, between being generous and being used. Most importantly, I'd learned that it's never too late to reclaim your own life. As I sat watching another sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I whispered to the evening breeze, I'm still here, and this story is mine to tell. And for the first time in years that felt like enough. More than enough. Felt like everything.